Chris here, the RC Geek, coming to you from the shop. And in this video, I wanted to talk about the new 10-channel receivers that Spektrum has released. They have an AS3X and safe version, and then they've also got the non-AS3X version. But I'm really happy to see that we now have a 10-channel option from Spektrum in a really nice lightweight package. There are some new features that come with the 10-channel, and so as a part of this video, what I want to do is we'll take a close look at the receiver, kind of how it varies from what's currently available, and then talk about some of the new features and such. But I've also installed it into the E-flite F-16 and done some advanced programming with it, which includes setting up Flaperons and Tailerons for the takeoff and landing. And so we'll talk in detail about the programming there, and then to finish it up, we'll talk about setting up AS3X, because I did set that up on this airplane also, because it flies great with the gyro settings that they have set from the factory. And so, like I mentioned, I'm really happy to have this option now. In order to take advantage of all 10 channels, of course, you do need a 10-channel or higher radio. So you know the NX10, IX12, IX20, conceivably, if you want to go up there. But I have also installed the 10-channel with AS3X in my Freewing Tomcat. And so I'm really happy with the performance of these receivers in these high-performance airplanes. And so let's get into it. We'll first take a look at the receiver in detail, and then we'll talk through programming and then finish it up with AS3X. So let's go. All right, so let's take a quick look at the receiver. This is the AR10360T, which is the AS3X and safe version. The non-AS3X version, exactly the same size, but it just doesn't have the gyro and all of that in it. Now, the form factor, when we look compared to the 8-channel receiver, very, very similar. In the case of the 10-channel, you have 7 ports along the bottom here, and then you have the 3 additional to make 10 at the top, whereas on the 8-channel, just 8 straight across. But you can see the thickness is very much the same. The only primary difference is the length. It's a little bit longer on the 10-channel versus the 8-channel. Otherwise, additional features, you've got the micro USB port here. That comes standard with all of the 10 channels. That is new to these, and so that makes connecting to your computer quite a bit easier. Also, the 10 channels come standard with barometer and vario telemetry data. And so that's new for these as well. Now, the other thing is you have the remote receivers, and these just plug into the SRXL2 ports here. And so if you're planning to use the remote receivers, you can use the bind button on the remote receiver itself to bind, or on the main receiver, but you do want to bind it with these in place, and so keep that in mind. Also, with respect to the antennas, okay, so the way that I like to set these up is at 90 degrees to each other within the model in 2 different planes. All right, so you can go like this, you can go vertically with one. That's just a holdover from my Airtronics days. It's never failed me. I've been extremely happy with the performance. And it's the same thing with the remote receivers as well. They've got the same type of antennas, and so you'll want to run it in 2 different planes. That's my recommendation. Also, you kind of keep them high in the model because 2.4 gigahertz is direct line of sight, and so you want to give it as much chance to see your radio connection as possible. All right, as we get into the programming, just real quick, I want to highlight we've got the full telemetry from the smart system, battery info here, battery voltage, and that can all be, of course, fine-tuned to whatever settings you want in the extended menus. All right, so the programming itself, it starts out with having the right model. So we're going to go into the system setup menu, and we are going to we set up the aircraft type as Flaperon on the wings, and then dual elevator. And so that's going to give us the Flaperon operation all the time, and then that's going to give us individual control of what we do with the elevators. All right, so from there, set up the flap system, And so I like my flaps on the top switch up here, so that's where I have that set up. But flaps minus 40% for mid flap, and that's only about 5 millimeters of deflection. And then I've got minus 100% for the full flap setting, and that's about 17 millimeters in deflection. And you'll notice I had to have a minus 8% up elevator mix. That's necessary because it does want to otherwise push the nose down. That gives us the Flaperon setting. And so to get the elevators to operate in the way that we want in terms of Tailerons, we set up a mix. And so that was set up here on mix 2, and it's simply an aileron to left elevator mix. And the way that I have it set up is that mix is off when we are in the neutral Flaperon setting, and then when I hit the flap switch, now the Taileron is active. Now doing the aileron to left elevator mix took care of all of the Taileron function that I wanted, and so the key is to set it up how you want on the switch. Okay. From there I went into the differential, and Flaperons are not very effective as ailerons when they are deflected downwards. You do lose some roll control, and that's why we went through and set up the Tailerons. And so I set up differential, so that way when we are at the mid flap setting, there's 60% differential, and at the full flap setting, we're at 100% differential. And that means that it's going to only move trailing edge up, because when you're fully deflected, there is no place to go in terms of deflecting downward, and any additional deflection downward isn't going to do much for you. And so the last thing was, in setting up the rates, I discovered that the Tailerons were too sensitive in the full flap setting. So I set up my aileron rates as part of my flap setting. And so when I'm at Flaperon's neutral, it's just aileron elevator control, and I've got 100% rate and 10% expo. But as soon as I drop the flaps, it drops to 85%, expo stays the same. And so that gives me that change in the aileron rate that I needed to maintain the roll control the way that I wanted it, because it was too sensitive keeping this at 100%. And so that is the gist of it in terms of the programming. It was a pretty simple setup on this particular airplane, but there's always, more options you can go depending on the type of airplane you're programming and what you want to do. Now, one last item of business. In order to set this up, the elevators come tied into a single connector, and so you have to go through and set up separate connectors for the two different elevator servos, and so I just cut the connector off and crimped on my own connectors, and so that took care of that. So the last item of business here is setting up the AS3X, and so to do that, you simply go into the forward programming menu, and in the case here, you want to run through the initial setup, and that is really quite simple. And so once you've done that, I have set my AS3X gains, tied that to this switch up here, so that way I could turn them on and off as I wanted. These are the gains that are programmed at the factory, give or take, and so I fly with that on all the time. And so you can go through and individually adjust these just by selecting and scrolling them. I already had gains that I knew that I wanted, and so it ended up being pretty easy. You do have to ensure that this, whatever switch you want to use, if you plan to go that direction, is assigned to a channel, otherwise it won't work. Also, like in the case of the F-16, I fly with a gyro on all the time, and so you don't necessarily even need to set this to a switch if you don't want to. And so that is primarily it. I've also set fixed gains on everything because I'm not adjusting anything in flight. You can set the gains so that you can adjust them on a dial and such in flight, but I didn't want to go that way. As I mentioned, I already knew what the settings were going to be. So yeah, that's it. I think on the AS3X, it's pretty simple if you just follow the prompt, and so it might take a little fiddling to get the switch going, but the key is to remember that this has to be assigned to a channel. All right, so there we have it. The 10-channel receivers. I'm really happy to have these options available now. They are a really nice receiver. They work fantastically. You've got the option of the remote receivers as well for added redundancy, and you've got those diversity antennas on all of them, which means you should get better range from them, but you do want to keep in mind some of the installation practices that I had mentioned. All right, so that's it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to follow along on social media at the RC Geek. Subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you at the field.